All right, we're live. So I'll go first with my example. Um, I decided to go over discounting, and so as like an employee, and later when I've supervised over people, I noticed that people that don't like to appear incompetent or um, say no when something's asked of them. So even when assignments will take too much time or management's asking for too much out of you, we'll still say, okay, yeah. And then instead of just being upfront about what we think the possibilities are, so we discount what we can actually do to save face in front of our supervisors.
I think that's really true.
I think it's kind of expected too. Like,
Yeah, I think it's really rare for somebody to actually take accountability.
I think it's more acceptable in a lot of teams for people to say, well, I tried my best, but I wasn't able to get it done in time, rather than giving an honest assessment of what can actually be done in the time given or with the resources they have.
Do you feel like that's kind of a change in philosophy, though? Like, I don't think it used to be that way when I first got into the workforce.
I think it's really dependent on the atmosphere of the place that you're at. Like, I know some managers don't tolerate it. People who try to save face at the expense of actually getting stuff done, or who consistently underperform usually are let go, depending on the management. Who would like to go next?
I can.
All right.
I did discounting too, and I took a personal experience from my small town. Really small, and there's nothing good to do, but we surprisingly, the town has a really good football team. And they go to state a lot. And so basically, all the football players are like idols in the town, and a lot of them are really stupid and don't pass their classes. But because the teachers are such diehard fans, they would rather just
Let them slide.
instead of teaching them responsibility and the importance of education and everything, they would much rather just win the football game, so they just pass them.
Sounds
That's
like
interesting.
college ball in a high school setting.
Yeah, it's really dumb because if you weren't one of the stars, then you couldn't. I mean, it was really sucky, but if you were one of the football stars, then you could literally get away with that thing.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. What about you, David?
So I did confirmation bias, and basically confirmation bias is, lack of a better term, where you look for firm or those that and you would um,
Sorry, I can't hear you very well.
so I said I went with confirmation bias. It's a bias that basically you try to find things that go in like versus what the other side believes. And as soon as you find it, you stop looking for other things. So you're just going based upon your own pre-existing. Were you able to hear all that?
I got like half.
So do you have an example for that?
So the example, and I pulled it up this morning. It was an article where they actually put two groups in together, and basically they gave them a series of articles to read, and it was in a politics kind of like a Republican versus Democrat sort of thing. And so they were asked to determine the truth because they were told that one of these articles was true and the other one was false. And they were also doing like a survey to see where they sat, and their articles were skewed one way or the other, and it was to find out which one was true or not. They were both false, but they could tell based upon the party lines or how your opinions were shaped, which way you believed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if they had certain views and opinions, then they would think the article that went along with what they said was right.
Correct.
I can see that.
Do you want me to do mine?
Go for it.
An ambiguous. So my example was my previous job. I worked for doing clinical research, which involves a lot of money, and often the research studies go for a long period of time. So the drug companies have a lot on the line. There's a lot of pressure to enroll and to enroll quickly. So sometimes sites compromise their data to get patients in, and therefore the data that comes out is compromised. Drug companies can kind of pull out different parts of the data they want to fit their needs, I guess you could say, to make their study flow and to get the results that they want. So oftentimes they're a little bit skewed. And then sites, we learned that we're often kind of getting fraudulent data as well and interpreting data differently. So there was a doctor's office in Arizona that was caught providing fraudulent blood samples and urine samples. They were asking their employees to make donations, so they were paid for hundreds of patients. So they were all fake. So the data that they provided was very biased and inaccurate. We also had a study where we got safety reports for patients that were having severe side effects. So there was like self-aggression, suicide, and harm to others. And the sponsor would word it in such a way that would make it seem not okay, but kind of as rare, more rare than it was actually happening. So we chose to withdraw from the study because we thought our own patients were at risk, and the FDA actually shut them down about 6 months later. Depending on how the reports are written and what data they decide to extract, there's a lot of ambiguity and bias in that industry.
So what sort of incentives were there to have a good face for the study? I mean, like, why were they giving false information?
So we were paid $10,000 or more per patient that we would enroll. So you would be given, let's say, a 1-year period of time to enroll as many patients as you could. So if the site skewed the data to get patients enrolled, have qualified, they were still getting paid.
Okay, so it's a monetary benefit.
Yeah. And the drug companies would send their own auditors out, so they would extract whatever data that they wanted. So when you see for drugs and they say they're all these side effects, they're not telling you the percentages of them, and they're not telling you all of them.
Interesting.
Pretty interesting. I mean, I loved it. It's a great field to be in, and there's a lot of really good people, but you see a lot of corners getting cut too.
Yeah. So which example would we like to use?
That one sounds good.
Would you like to copy and paste it in, Melanie?
Where do you want me to paste it?
Just in the example. Oh, if you look on Hangouts, then I sent a link over for the new one.
Oh, did you?
This week. Yeah.
Let me see if I can find it. So did you see our assignments a little different this week?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting.
Well, I mean, what we're supposed to talk about here.
Oh, I didn't see that. No.
So I don't think we have to present an idea. Let me go back here.
Yeah, it says we don't have to do a quiz question.
Okay. Good thing you guys look at this. I would have blown right past that.
Well, we were supposed to discuss our examples. We're supposed to talk about the article that we read
Ah,
about the accountants.
well, as far as like, the article altogether, I think there's a reason why they're the big five accounting firms and why not many more come into existence. Like, as far as with the same base for clientele and everything. I think it's because they have established names and they're large enough so that they have more credibility. Like, they won't take a fall because the accountants working for them will get fired if they make any too biased decisions. And they usually work in teams that prevent them from going too far off from what things actually are.
Yeah. Well, and I think they have some pretty hefty regulations that they have to follow. Like you said, it's not worth the fall. So one of the questions on here is for business students and others who will not be auditors, what kind of education, if any, would help future business professionals avoid bias?
I think there is always going to be some level of bias, no matter what. But I think just knowing about it can kind of help you out, so you're aware of what they're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's natural to see the things that you want to see that would benefit you.
I think it's also natural to get accustomed to the type of things that you deal with. Like, depending on what position you're in and what work you're doing, you're going to see things the way that the manager sees it or the way that the accountant sees it, etc. So there's always going to be bias according to your experience.
Right.
So I think
point.
working in teams or consulting with people, for instance, at the clinic that I used to work at, there were team leads for each of the divisions. So like the nurses, the MAs, and schedulers, and there was a lead from each department that would report to the management usually every week or so about how things were going and if any issues were coming up. That way, the manager had all the different opinions from the various types of employees.
Yeah, I guess just kind of checks and balances type stuff. Because, I mean, if someone else is going to be checking all your stuff, then, I mean, I guess unless you're in cahoots with them, but, if I knew someone was going to double check and look at everything I said was good or okay, then I wouldn't, do anything sketchy. I wouldn't want my reputation getting out that I was corrupt or anything like that. So I think if, like you said, teamwork, like someone, I guess we always had to pass something through someone else, then we'd be a lot more honest than what we did.
So is there any education out there that you guys think is beneficial to avoid bias? For me, I think a lot of it just comes from experience.
That's all I can really think of as well. I mean, there are practices that can avoid bias, but education doesn't imply an application, so it's kind of hard to say that there's
when I did clinical research, I earned a certification for it, where I studied and I had to take a test, and I learned like all the regulations and the laws, which when you understand the implication of all those, it kind of, I feel like, holds you a little more accountable, because then I could see the legal ramifications of my actions. But I don't know, like, if there's like a university or some course that would help with that.
I guess being aware of how, especially like knowing the laws and whatnot, knowing how reporting a certain way could be misconstrued or not necessarily truthful or misleading.
Yeah.
In that way, an education would help you distinguish perhaps what you're more or how you're more inclined to report. Like an education about how to interview prevents you from lawsuits and stuff like that, because you don't discriminate or ask questions that you're not supposed to.
So another question is, if you're an accounting major, what will you do about what you learned from reading this article?
Are any of us accounting majors?
No.
Nope.
No way.
That's how I feel too. So
why do you think it's so difficult to overcome bias even when you know about it?
it's like asking, why is it hard to be compassionate? Because we see the world through our eyes and we know our experiences, so bias is as natural as perception.
Was it Palmer that said it kind of defines who you are? It's your character, and you become defensive a little bit.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like, who's right and who's wrong too. I don't know. In some things, maybe not all, but like one person might say, "Oh yeah, I think that's just fine. That does this. I don't see anything wrong." It could be because they do it too, or they would have done it too. And so if they say that the other person was wrong, that means that they were wrong too. So I don't know if that made sense or not. It did in my head before I said it.
That reminds me, when I was a youth, I had a bishop that didn't like us hugging the young woman. So he said he didn't want to see any young men hugging a young woman. And it was a law of chastity thing, he said. But, obviously that's a different view than other bishops. And his interpretation of us breaking it or coming close or whatever was vastly different than others.
Yeah.
So one other question is, why do you think when Congress passed the, I don't know how to say it, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, there weren't more radical reforms like the ones suggested by the author? I don't remember what the author had suggested. Do you guys remember?
I don't either.
I would imagine if when they passed that act, they included everything that they thought was necessary. So if there were other extremes, they would have included it. Don't you think?
I think so. Let's see if I can. Okay, so based on the second paragraph in the radical remedies, they're saying that with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or however you pronounce that, it limits what accounting firms can do as far as, consulting goes, since it's a conflict of interest, to remain impartial and then basically advertise your business to the company or benefit from their success. So the law prohibited some aspects of consulting, but not all of them, and it doesn't completely get rid of an accounting firm's ability to consult the company. Also, accounting firms are hired or fired by the companies that they audit, so there's incentive to remain on their good side so they don't lose their jobs.
So it also did a little bit and the board of directors. So because of that, before it was everybody
I'm having a hard time hearing it.
I'm only able to hear about a quarter of what you say, David.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically the blame has been shifted due to the act. So it took it from being all the accounting corporations and moved it more towards the CEOs of the actual institutions themselves, and companies. And so because of that, it's sharing the blame, whereas it used to be it was all fault. You just blame them and then nothing fault. Created one debacle, created all those shops and same concept. Now there's more liability, which is why it wasn't necessarily a change everything. That makes sense.
I think I caught most of that. I just missed the part where you mentioned why they didn't necessarily want to change everything.
So it's because you already have somebody accountable. So it's not like it just gets tossed to the wind. You now have somebody who has to sign on those financial statements, stating that they are true and correct to the best of their knowledge, and that nothing has been done to make them misleading.
So in other words, somebody to bring to court if it's proven that it wasn't right.
Correct. Yeah, and that's part of it, because it's somebody within the company now who has to sign it. It's not just the accounting department of the accounting group that they hire.
So it shifts the blame or the pointing finger of the SEC to the company instead of the accounting firms.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I got you now.
So my husband and I went to dinner tonight before our class, and he was telling me that we have a rental that's on the other side of town, and it's outside of city limits. Neighborhood, and our house sits just outside of the neighborhood, so we don't have any regulations or HOAs or anything.
That's nice.
And recently, this neighborhood is older. There's older homes, and they are all on a shared well. And the city came to them and said that their well was contaminated and that they needed to go on city water. So the street that goes out has been connected into town with all these houses recently. There's a ton of construction. So our property sits right next to there, which is funny because our well is not contaminated. Our neighbor's well isn't contaminated. We're all on the same aquifer. So we think that they had some inspectors come out or, pulled samples or whatever that weren't true, and they strong-armed these people into getting on city water to the tune of $2,500 bill to a lot of those people that probably couldn't afford it. So I feel like, if they came to my husband and I and said, you have to be on city water because your well is contaminated, we would have our own inspection done, and not really take their inspection because they have an agenda. And I feel like sometimes that's what happens in business, is that you get somebody that comes to you with some data, but they have an agenda. They have an outcome that they're wanting. So they're going to skew it to their, whatever their benefit is.
That reminds me of, like, news articles lately.
Which ones?
Just how, in general, how news articles are prone to tell a portion of the truth because it's more juicy.
Yeah. Or they're trying to get people in an uprise because they don't have all the information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting how gold. are.
That's because you expect people to do their jobs and be honest.
Yeah.
What would we like to put down for our discussion paragraph?
I think that last sentence is that you just said is a pretty good opener. I mean, unfortunately, we expect people to do their jobs, to be honest, but human nature takes over, right? Whether it's lack of education or confidence or whatever an agenda might be. I think to overcome bias, you have to get people to see the consequences, to see the end game, and not just the short-term results.
So we expect people to be honest and do their jobs right. Unfortunately, incentives skew the outcome common. I'm not sure what I was trying to say there.
Hillary just sent an email.
Yeah, I caught that. She's sick with the flu. All right, what else would we like to put down for a paragraph? We expect people to be honest and do their jobs right. Unfortunately, incentives often skew the common outcome, or I guess not common, but desired. Bias always plays a role even once we are aware of the bias. What's another topic we mentioned?
Yeah. Do we want to summarize our conversation about the Oxley Act?
Yes. How do they spell?
Hello.
Hello.
Yay, okay. Sorry, guys.
Are you doing okay?
I feel absolutely horrible, but I would like to participate if possible.
All right. You made it.
Hillary, we were just kind of summing up our conversation. Do you have any opinions on bias?
1 second, sorry. Like my personal experience or how I feel about it.
Do you want to read her kind of what we have so far?
Yeah, just a moment.
Okay.
All right, so basically our conversation about the article included we expect people to be honest and do their jobs right. Unfortunately, incentives often skew the desired outcome. Bias always plays a role, even once we are aware of the bias, and education is not a viable defense to base experience or to bias, and experience is much more helpful in this scenario. And because of the act, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, designated an administrative person within the company being audited to blame. Less focus was placed on the auditing and accounting service providers.
That sounds really good.
Hillary, did you have any thoughts on the article that we read?
I was able to like sorry, relate it on how it relates to like daily, like how we are in our businesses, how like sometimes we're biased even when we like think we're not being it. I know for me, like in my photography, like sometimes I try really hard not not to be biased. But sometimes it's a little hard because I'm like, oh, well, this person liked, put in more effort. They wanted to look better for their photos. Or sometimes for other ones, I'm like, oh, maybe they really didn't, try, or, they don't really care for their photos. And I feel like the ones that like don't really care if I put in too much work into like editing the photos or not, and kind of like anything. And so then like it's on me to like be honest and make sure that I do a good job.
Everybody's so quiet.
I feel like I talk too much. I think it's
just fine.
What's that, Palmer?
I just said I feel like you do just fine.
Oh, thanks. I think this paragraph is substantial enough, if we want to call it, though. Just add what David's been working on while we've been talking. He changed the last sentence to say, because the act designated that the CEO and CFO of the company being audited would be held accountable, whereas less focus and blame was placed on the auditing and accounting service providers. If the officers refuse to sign, there must be a written statement describing why. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yeah, sounds good.
Well, sweet.
Yep, sounds great. Thank you.
I keep on forgetting your last name, Hillary. It's Kelly, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Alrighty, well, I'll go ahead and get this submitted then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Feel better, Hillary.
Thanks. See you guys next week.
What's that, David?
Have a good night.
All right.
All right. Have a good night.
See you guys next week.